All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Dota Procast, episode number 5.5. We'll call, I don't know. Anyways, welcome to the podcast here. Of course, I'm BreakyCPK, going to be joined by Elevated, as always. Here's my co-host. And we got plenty of Dota 2 competitive news to get into, kind of go over, talk about. Looking forward to another fun show. It is on a Thursday. Obviously, we had some technical issues on Tuesday. My modem decided to explode, and not literally, but died on me. So, as we started the show, kind of went out. But we are back. Definitely ready to talk some more Dota. So, Elevated, though, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Episode take 2, episode 5, take 2. And I think that you should just go with the story that your modem actually exploded, because that would be way more interesting.
Be pretty cool, right?
Happened.
Yeah, no, it's not much of a story, really. Just like literally my lights flickered, everything just stopped working. I noticed the modem was just out, and sure enough, through a couple of tests, I eventually found out that I guess it just died. I don't know. So I bought a new modem, and I'm good to go, though. And looking forward to, again, talking some more Dota here. So today's show is going to be a lot about the TI-8 qualifiers, of course. So we're going to take a look back. It's been a little bit of time now, a little over a week or about a week or so since they finished, sure enough. But we're going to take a look back and kind of run through the regions, see how they played out. In case you missed any of the regions, do our best to kind of give you a full overview of how it all looked here. But you excited to talk about these qualifiers here, Elevated?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I was a huge fan of the format of being split into the two different sections, like 3 qualifiers, one for like the first 4 days and then 3 qualifiers for the next, because as a Dota fan, it allowed me to actually consume a whole lot more of the qualifiers than trying to kind of like keep track of like 16 different tabs of Twitch at the same time, which is how it had been in the past, or what it felt like anyway. So I was a really big fan of being able to watch more, and as a result, I think that we can have some pretty good discussions about what actually happened in most of the regions, because we were able to see that.
Yeah, I can tell you from a production point of view as well. I mean, it was really great for all parties. I agree with you 100% that the idea that Valve decided to go with splitting it up, PJ or whoever's decision it was, either way, with the 3 and 3, like you said, it was clearly a very good decision. So the first 3 regions were China, CIS, as well as South America, right? And then, North America, Europe, and Southeast Asia was kind of that second half. Now, South America specifically, it dipped over a little bit into the second half there, you could say, as had a little bit of drama. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But there is also a couple other things that we're going to go to after we talk about the TI-8 qualifiers, including the Summer Cup that is, of course, happening right now, a qualifier for the BTS Summit 9 event to look forward to, and also a little bit of drama. I'll just say that's been going on. And you know what? It's what would be another week of Dota without some drama. So nothing too crazy there, I guess. But
exactly.
We'll talk about that as well. But are we ready? Are we ready to get into this here?
Yeah, let's dive into the quals, man.
Okay. So we'll start with China. Like I said, that was one of the first of the 3 regions to kick it off for the TI-8 qualifier. So China, 2 teams ultimately qualifying out of the China region. Now, we had our expected, and LFY was definitely one of those teams that anyone would expect as far as like almost a lock, right, where they were in the former TI event. They had a solid season. They weren't like the greatest team this year. Obviously, they didn't qualify for TI in the first place, but they had a good enough season to believe that they would also be qualifying for TI-8. They came up short. They did go into the playoffs, but they ultimately lost to Invictus Gaming, who knocked them out. But the big storyline is Team Serenity actually taking that first place spot. Yeah, you did, man. I mean, you saw faith in these guys, and ZZZ and crew doing some work. So what the hell happened here, man?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. China, I mean, we've talked about it before. China's always a really interesting region because the internal meta there is not something that really translates over to the international tournaments, just because we get like the same 4 teams out of that region pretty much all the time. However, their tier 2 scene is really this, I mean, it's legit. Like, they have a lot of teams that are quite good, and they're all playing each other basically all season long, kind of behind this curtain that we never really get to take a look behind until the TI regionals. And so, and I'm speaking obviously as a Westerner, living in the United States, where I just simply am not going to stay up until 3 a.m. watching Chinese Dota every single day. So that being said, the Dota that we saw in these qualifiers was really interesting because we had definitely a clash of styles. I feel like the LFY, for example, is sort of more of like the polished Chinese style that we would see in these in like the actual tournaments, the lands that we had throughout the season. But then we also had a lot of this sort of like new blood, like Team Serenity and some of these smaller orgs that brought some interesting stuff to the table. And it worked out pretty well for that interesting stuff.
You know, you mentioned LFY. We talked about Invictus Gaming Ultimate qualifying, but really, if you look back at the round robin as well, not only Team Serenity, who ended up qualifying themselves, of course, but For the Dream. This is a team that came out of the open qualifiers, as did really every team but Invictus Gaming, of course. But the point being, a team that we didn't really know anything about. And I think the best way to kind of realize that is to go to Wikipedia, see like majority of their players don't even have a profile that's been created. So For the Dream going 6-1 of the group stages, they did get knocked out though, of course, 0-2 in the playoffs in the end. But goes more to your point, really, that this is a scary region, man. And maybe we shouldn't be the most surprised that we got the results that we did. But I will say, from what we saw throughout the season, I was personally a little surprised that Keen Gaming did not only advance onto the playoffs, but maybe make more of a splash here in this event. But they came up short. Finished with a 4-3 record. They, of course, lost in the ultimate tiebreaker to both LFY and Invictus Gaming. But I think that was definitely a disappointing team coming up short there in the China region.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like maybe at that stage it comes down to sort of like the players that have seen the big stage, which are obviously like the LFYs and the Invictus Gaming crew, whereas Keen Gaming is sort of relatively unknown players still. And they're middle of the road in China. I was personally surprised by Invictus Gaming and how good they looked in a lot of their games. Like they looked to completely outclass a couple of these other teams. I mean, For the Dream, for example, they looked way better than For the Dream during the playoff section. And that was surprising to me, considering their group stage record and just the fact that IG really hadn't done much this season.
Yeah. There was something that I do find interesting kind of after the fact, after all the qualifiers were wrapped up. There was a tweet that actually suggested a kind of a leak of a schedule of sorts for the China region for one of the teams, actually. It didn't say which team specifically, but it was just one of the teams that happened to qualify for TI8. And it made the point, there were a couple of bullet points in it where that the team was to practice 6 days a week for 13-hour practice days. And on their off day on top of that, they wouldn't even necessarily be allowed to do their own thing. They would still have to do activities with teammates, whatever that may be. So I just found that very interesting. It kind of gives you the mentality that these teams are having, in this case specifically from China. But when you really sit back and think about it, these guys are playing for what's at least going to be a $20+ million prize pool, upwards of almost $30 million, very likely. It's a very big deal, and it seems like that makes sense, really. I mean, it's a very long day, but this isn't your typical job, obviously, when it comes down to it. But I think my ultimate point, it kind of goes back to, yet again, as you were talking about, just the Tier 2 scene and how China Dota in general, they're just so serious about it. And this is just yet another example of that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, like if you think about traditional sports, right, like their schedules are pretty crazy, too, during their preseason or even during the season. Like teams are traveling and they're with their team and then they're playing a game and then they're with their team again and they're traveling more. It's fairly similar, and I don't necessarily think that this schedule, I feel like there was a lot of kind of blown out of proportion where people were very focused on like, oh man, look at how much time they have to spend together and how long they're practicing and there's no breaks and no phone and all of this. And it's just kind of, to me, is blown out of proportion, because if you want to be the best in the world at something, you really do have to sacrifice a lot of things. And if you remember, Wings Gaming was very famous for basically doing nothing but practicing Dota up to TI 6. And like their players were talking about how they all had like back issues and stuff at the event because they'd literally just been sitting in chairs for like 18 hours a day
Yeah.
and stuff. So I mean, I'm not surprised that this is the schedule. And if I remember correctly, Matumba Man tweeted that he wasn't surprised either. Like that's pretty standard for the Dota world.
Fair enough here. Yeah, so I guess before we move on to the next region, you know, speaking of China, Invictus Gaming, Team Serenity, the two teams coming out on top of all the invited teams. So what, it's 5 teams in total, right? Or there was 4 teams from China initially? Let me double check that. It was PSG LGD, Vici Gaming, Newbie, and VGJ Thunder. So yeah, it's actually 6 teams in total. God, that's crazy.
Yep.
Out of China going to be representing. So I don't know which of these two, Serenity or Invictus Gaming, has the better chance? Because obviously Invictus Gaming has the history as far as being around much longer, but Serenity, they definitely have looked very good in these qualifiers. Now it's a long time before the TI event itself. So, but there are people making comparisons because of the way they played, as you're getting at earlier, you know, to a Wings Gaming, to a CDEC even, who went through the Opens, or, you know, in the wild card and eventually made their run in TI itself. Is Serenity are they a team that we can expect to do the same, you think?
I think it's kind of hard to say. Like, Wings Gaming they weren't like the most out of nowhere team. They were a team that kind of had some results during the season. But the similarities are there. Team Serenity is picking some kind of off the wall drafts a little bit, you know, some non-meta heroes, some non-meta combinations. And so that obviously makes people really excited because ultimately in the Dota scene, we want to see crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's why we watch the game, is because we don't want to just see, you know, Beastmaster, Gyrocopter, whatever being picked every single game. We want to see some weird combinations. We want to see Pudge. We want to see, like, you know, Drow Ranger offlane or something weird like that. And so anytime a team starts doing that stuff, obviously people are going to be like, oh, look, Wings Gaming, because they were kind of like the first team that really pulled off some fairly unmeta stuff on a huge stage.
Yeah.
I don't really know. You know, we had such a small sample size of what Team Serenity can do. They looked good. They had some very, very good team fighting, which was another kind of like shades of Wings thing, because that was really where Wings won their games, is that their team fights were so coordinated and they were so well communicated between the individual players that they looked like they were just one brain playing all of the heroes. And so when you see that does really excite me about Team Serenity.
Yeah.
That being said, you know, once you get on the big stage and you're drafting against these tier 1 captains, will the drafts hold up? And that's where somebody with a ton of experience like Q on Invictus Gaming might be able to pull his team a little bit farther, because he has drafted and played against these really high caliber captains before.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I really don't see Serenity as a team that has the firepower to kind of carry this into TI. Like I said, with the break that we have, and again, you even mentioned how this season we really haven't heard anything from them. The likelihood that, because the season was just so much different too than any other season that we've had in the past leading up into TI itself, to not have any representation really at all throughout the whole season, then all of a sudden come at the last second, I just can't see that really, you know, really working out. But who knows? I guess the game does constantly shift. You know, how many patches we're going to have in between, we don't officially know yet. We just had another one right after the qualifiers happen, so that is also obviously worth to take into consideration, but we'll have to find out here.
Yeah, I mean, please surprise me. I would love to have another crazy Dark Horse story at TI. It always makes for a wonderful viewing experience.
So something else I know that you were really intrigued by yourself, going through all the stats of these regions, kind of making some comparisons here from region to region. So wrapping up with China, before we move on to the next one, I'm kind of showing it on screen even, at least. I believe I have it correctly, but where Leshrac actually the most played hero. Only a 30% win percentage, though, so that right off the bat stands out to me in the region. But
yeah, that was pretty interesting. You know, obviously this hero has been a big part of the meta for the last few months, but it's kind of hard to say. Like, I feel like some people, I think, even Gods has said that China sometimes seems to kind of be like one step behind in the meta development. And so Lesh is a hero that was like first pick, first ban in every single game for like the super major, if I remember correctly. And then it seemed to kind of like, obviously he got nerfed in a couple of patches in a row and then kind of seemed to tailor off. But another interesting thing about China is that they had significantly less heroes picked than any other region. They had 42 unpicked heroes, and the next highest was NA with 32. So their actual meta was much tighter or smaller than any other region.
That's crazy. Yeah, no, looking down at that, there are several heroes in there that you kind of scratch your head a little bit at and be like, all right, well, teams, I guess, just don't want to try here in this event. But Drow Ranger, for one, really stands out to me because I specifically was casting the NA region, and we'll see here later on, but Drow was one of the star heroes of that region. So not even picked in China, yet in NA was one of the more dominating heroes. We saw a priority band even, so...
Yeah, another one is I mean, Bloodseeker was barely picked and had a very low win rate. Beastmaster had a sub 50% win rate, and that was a hero that was winning like all over the place in the other regions. So it is really interesting to see that their meta is fairly significantly different. At least once you get past maybe like the kind of like auto pick ban ones, like IO and that sort of stuff.
All right, let's go over to CIS now, jumping into another region. So CIS, one that's had a little bit of controversy going into it in the sense of, did they deserve more? You know, that was the big argument, but ultimately they got one spot. And personally, right off the bat, I think we got to kind of see that them getting the one spot was pretty deserving in the end. Not that it was as poorly played Dota, but this region is just so chaotic. It feels like where just one team is dominating one month, and then another team pops up and does it the next month. And we had yet another example of that to an extent. And one of the bigger storylines for me off the bat was that Empire and Vega Squadron finished 7th and 8th in the groups, and then Na'Vi didn't even qualify for the regional qualifiers on top of that. So you have the three of the biggest organizations behind Virtus Pro not even having any impact in the regional qualifiers. I don't know what to think of that. It's like, I don't even know, is that healthy? Like, should CIS be happy about this? Or, I don't know. But ultimately, so off the bat, that was the biggest thing to me. Fly to Moon, of course, also now known as Windstrike. They claimed the spot in the end. But, man, I'm focusing on Empire Vega Squadron first. What the hell, man?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Empire's had a few different shuffles of their players recently. I don't feel like they've been a very solid team for at least the last like 3 or 4 months. So I wasn't overly surprised that they didn't perform well. I didn't think that they would perform quite as badly as they did, but we did know that there were some sort of up and coming CIS stacks that were looking pretty good in like the few weeks before the qualifiers started. But I mean, obviously, Empire has some very talented players. They have 3 of their core members in Ghostic, FN, and Miposhka from, I believe, even the beginning of the season. But I definitely feel like they are a team that is still kind of in flux. And obviously, that's not a very good way to go into something as grueling as the TI qualifiers, which will split your team apart at the seams if you don't have a whole lot of, coordination and team spirit between you.
So as mentioned, Windstrike, it's something about, I really wish they got to stick with their actual Fly to Moon. It's just this more fun to say, and we know them as.
Logo is better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a cool name, but now known as Windstrike, thanks to, I'm sure, sponsorship and everything, but sure they're getting a good deal out of it, so, that's great for them. But they qualified. They had to defeat Espada in the grand finals. Of course, the Espada that we all know and love throughout. Yeah, exactly. It's the Espada with the roster of ILTW, Nyx, BZZ, Immersion, and Misha as their 5-man roster. But Espada, they were kind of one of the dark horse teams that came out of nowhere in the CIS region and almost claimed a spot to TI. I mean, they would have been a very similar storyline to Fly to the Moon at the Epicenter event earlier in the season, but of course coming up short, but still hell of a performance from them. But yeah, Windstrike taking it, and personally I'm happy that they won it. I think that they're going to be one of the more fun teams to watch. I'm not going to sit here and say I expect them to go deep in this event by any means, but I think they're going to be fun to watch, fun to follow. They have potential to pull off some upsets. And if it wasn't them, I was thinking Team Spirit would be a team to look out for in the CIS region and possibly qualifying. But Fly to Moon, now known as Windstrike, overall I think that is very good that they qualified and deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that this team does have that sort of X factor. You know, they have a bunch of very skilled players on their team. They have this sort of crazy play style, and then that's kind of what you want. That's what you want to make a run. That's like the MVP Phoenix style of potentially being the spoiler at TI, of being this really aggressive team with very high skilled players on it that have the chance to just kind of show up, be in the zone for one day, and ruin some big teams' chances at winning TI. And with somebody like Iceberg, and I mean, all of the players from 1 to 5, all of them are like the type of player that you would see kind of maybe thriving in that TI environment where they don't have anything to lose.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it. And it's just crazy to me thinking that this is a team that had to qualify via the Madness qualifiers at Epicenter, which was a completely open best-of-1 qualifier, mind you, that literally lived up to the name of the Madness qualifiers, and it happened to be in the Russian region, though, so it was to an advantage for the CIS teams, understandably, you know, being a CIS event, but it was because of that, and then obviously the great play that they had at Epicenter, they run, getting 3rd place, defeating even Virtus Pro along the way. I mean, all of a sudden, here they are now qualifying for TI. Talk about just a complete shift in the last 3 months of this season, but that's sometimes how it works. And you know, we're talking about earlier in a team like Wings Gaming with momentum and just chaotic play of sorts. I'm not saying that this is a Wings Gaming team by any means, but they definitely remind me a little bit more of a Wings than, say, a Serenity would, for sure. Again, I'm not going to claim that they're going to get all the way to the finals, but it wouldn't surprise me to see some upsets is what I go back to. And yet again, I'm happy that they are the team moving on here out of CIS. So
definitely. I think one other kind of interesting point is that in the CIS region, it seems like we've always sort of had this fairly same group of players, but each year they're just kind of shuffled onto different teams. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of the first year where it felt like some of these players who have been shuffled from team to team to team to team were actually kind of finding their spot. You know, like Espada is ILTW, Nyx, BZZ have been on countless teams in the CIS region. Team Spirit, you got Illidan G, Phobos, Viver, and FNG. Again, teams that have, or players that have been on countless teams. Windstrike themselves, Silent, Iceberg, Nangrata, No Fear, and Always Want to Fly have also been on like every team in the CIS region as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, the org doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of influence on what team is going to be coming out of this region at this point.
Yeah. You know, CIS is where Dota 2 start as far as being dominant, obviously. So, you know, it's bound to maybe come back. And obviously with Virtus Pro success this season and Windstrike qualifying, it's going to be fun to watch this region as a whole and how they perform at TI. So, again, looking at the stats here, Nagasarn happens to be the most picked hero, so that off the bat already a little bit different than what we saw with China. Leshrac, a little more successful of a hero in this region, still up there in picks. Look at Clockwork, by the way, 11-1 record. I'm looking at
I definitely made a note of that because that's a hero that's gotten nerfed a lot recently, but I've still been hearing from, you know, high MMR pubs and just in general that it still seems to be a fairly valued hero. Like people are still picking it. I mean, I know that PPD ran Clockwork as a support quite often in the NA qualifiers. And yeah, anytime you see a hero that's picked more than 10 times with a 90% win rate, that's pretty, you know, eye-opening. Pay attention to this one.
Yeah, that's something to look out for there from their region, you know, pending some more patches to come, but still. Beastmaster, I know you'd also mentioned from the China region had an unsuccessful run in Tier 2. It would 2-9 record, I believe that would be. So maybe Beastmaster being overplayed a little bit by some teams. and what he brings to the table. I mean, he's always a very dominant hero when it comes to the vision game and his push and everything. So it's hard to really make out what actually he's more of a solo offlaner, I guess, which maybe is the biggest thing, right? Where we see a lot of these dual aggressive lanes, so perhaps that's part of it. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be something where it just doesn't quite fit like the CIS team's play style, where they want to group up early and fight a lot. Just because Beast is always sort of like I mean, he tends to trend towards being sort of like a solo gamer, where he's off in the other lane trying to create map pressure through split pushing and then, showing up for key fights. But in CIS, it seems like maybe they're just kind of starting to fight from like, level 5 on. And Beast doesn't quite fit into that meta.
Drow only played one game. Magnus not playing. Just again, I have NA in my mind because of the region I followed. And it's crazy to me that you just have so much of a difference from region to region. But okay, so CIS right there. Let's jump into South America. There's not much to say about this one. So no, there's a little bit to say about this one. Where going into it, I think it's safe to say that it was probably the least, hyped, maybe is a good way to put it, where a lot of people would have expected either Pain Gaming or maybe SG Esports, with especially the recent pickups of Flea and Stan King going into the qualifiers, could make a splash. But this is a region that had all open qualifier teams, some of them invited because of all the roster changes. It provided some entertainment for good and bad, though, throughout it. And what was supposed to be a 4-day event, like every other qualifier, ended up being 6 days because of some unfortunate circumstances. Let's see. There was the DDoSing situation, apparently, that was going on, where a couple of the teams were dealing with constantly getting disconnected and lagging out. And the administration decided to delay the event by a full day because of that, so the teams could get things sorted out as far as their internet goes. And then we had the whole player getting banned drama. A tune from Thunder Predator found to be using macros for playing Meepo, as we all saw on Reddit, I'm sure. And Huskar. Oh, really? It was actually Huskar as well?
That was the main one, actually, was the armlet toggling on Huskar.
Oh, yeah, no. What am I thinking? Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. So point is, he was found using macros. There's a whole debate came from it. We're not going to sit here and argue. The show will last forever, I'm sure. So, but point is, they end up getting banned from the event, or I guess disqualified from the event as a result of that being found out. Despite initially they were in the grand finals, then that was found out.
They beat Pain, right?
They beat Pain and SG, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
to get to the grand finals. So that's kind of how the storyline went. Then after that happened, though, later that night, early the next morning, is when this news broke of the macro play from Atune, and the administration decided to forfeit their matches, disqualify from the event, and they kind of played it out with the other 3 teams, where it was then Taurus versus SG, and the winner would play Pain in the finals. Or no, it worked like that. So point is, Pain ultimately qualified, but yeah, where to start? Let's start with the drama. Let's just get that out of the way. What the hell, man? That was some weird stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to think about all of the disconnected. I guess it's just, I know that a lot of South American players have always kind of complained about the instability of the internet down there. Maybe it was infrastructure, maybe it was something more sinister than that, but I know that it did. I think that this qualifier really kind of highlighted like both the potential and some of the shortcomings of this region, more so than any other qualifier for TI8. Just because we had some incredible play. There were some really, really good games. There were some very highly contested games, very high-skilled players doing amazing things. But then there was also just this kind of like underlying...
It's like, South America stuff. Yeah,
right.
I see what you're saying.
And so I think it was, I personally really enjoyed it as sort of like a window into South America, because I was able to watch more of it than I'd ever watched before. And I did see a lot of really amazing Dota being played, and very entertaining games, teams throwing back and forth. And, I think it was probably overall good for the region that this kind of stuff happened, because first of all, that got them more publicity. It exposed how good their Dota can be, how entertaining it can be, but it also exposed like some sort of things that have always kind of been going on in South America. You know, we've always had like shady organizations kind of exploiting their players down there. And it's just like, I want South America to be good. I personally really want South America to be a big part of the scene because there's so many passionate fans and players down there.
So does Valve.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think Valve's on the right track with, you know, trying to get this region to be part of like the overall scene. And
yeah.
I'm getting kind of off of the drama thing. But,
well, it's no,
you know, like
I think no. To your point, I think it's great to bring that up because you're not wrong. It's no one's. I mean, I should say no one's rooting against SA because there are plenty out there that are, I'm sure. But personally, myself and it sounds like yourself, definitely rooting for SA. We want them to be successful. But it just seems like we keep having these things that just hold the whole region back as a whole, whether it's the chaos of the teams, banning of players, of course, notorious for that in the first place. It's just thing after thing after thing that just continues to be the case. It finally felt like this season later on, okay, at least we're getting Pain Gaming and maybe SG Esports. Finally, the SA is coming about, bringing in a couple of players from some other regions. And ultimately, yes, we are having Pain Gaming qualify, and I think that's something we should really focus on out of all this, perhaps. But we still had those storylines of South America, Dota, and with the bans and the disqualifications and a 6-day tournament that was supposed to be 4 days. It just it sucks. It sucks for everyone, really, let alone the players to play in. But with all of that said, thank God Pain Gaming or SG, I would have been fine with SG as well, but personally, I thank God that Pain Gaming qualified because I think they are the best representation out of South America, and they can make a splash at TI. I really do think that, and we'll get more into that, later on as TI gets closer. But I look forward to it, and I think Pain Gaming is a team to look out for.
Yeah, I'm not quite as optimistic as you, but I definitely would like to see them do well, and they have the potential to do that.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that they had one of the more wide open metas as far as hero picks as well. They only had 30 unpicked, and they were the third least, or the third most in terms of the broadness of the hero pool. But it was also the only region where IO was not the most banned hero, which was kind of interesting.
Oh,
maybe just speaks to not having a lot of IO players on the teams, or who knows?
Did China actually have the most ban on IO? Really, they're notorious for not actually really focusing on IO as a hero. So I didn't check that myself. I've been looking at just the individual hero picks.
Yeah, it was just South America.
Okay. Off the bat for me, I mean, obviously Warlock on top. Interesting there. But Beastmaster, the second most played. So here we are talking about CIS and China. Fairly low down there when it was played, not doing too well. For South America, they love this hero and played it pretty well amongst their brethren at least. So that's something to look for as far as going into TI. Skywrath and third most played as well. So a couple of things that stand out to me at least.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess let's circle back to the macro thing just real quick.
Okay.
Did Attune need those macros to win the games? It didn't really appear to be that way. But again, maybe it's just good that this kind of thing is coming out because now we're getting some definitive you cannot use these macros. At least it's stated for everybody finally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those cases of, and I know people are talking about, why is it in the rules? Where is the specific rules on macros? I've always been a proponent of, when it comes to admins making decisions for their events, that there should be some underlying rule that essentially states, ultimately the admin has the final say, and I am strongly for that because there are scenarios that come up such as this where, yes, when you really think back in hindsight, this should have perhaps been thought about before and written in the rules very clearly, but it wasn't. So the idea that they can now go back and revisit it in the moment even and make a decision, which I personally, and I said this in the reaction when it happened in the first place, that I thought they made the right decision by disqualifying the team, because whether or not you can sit here and say that it's what won them the game, it was used. And I think you and I were both, there's a lot of Twitter conversation going on, and I brought up the idea of the comparison to traditional sports and using, steroids in traditional sports, and the idea of that and why athletes do it. It gives them an edge. I mean, it's simple as that. Whether or not it helps them ultimately win said game or whatever is completely a moot point as far as I'm concerned. It's giving them an edge. That's why they're doing it in the first place. And so banning or more so disqualifying the team, I think was the right decision. And to even go further than that, again, I don't want to draw on too long on this, but even go further on that, I think Valve should look at a 6-month possible ban on Attune as a player, to make a very strong point that they're not going to allow that. This is going to be a no questions asked. You are not allowed to use macros when it comes to playing competitive Dota 2. It's simple as that. Will it happen? We'll have to wait and see. But I personally would not be surprised, and I think that it should be the case, if anything, to make a strong point.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the ban, but I kind of feel like there should be some sort of maybe statement just kind of clarifying like the actual rules of engagement from Valve officially, because I believe the ban was actually made by the FACEIT admins, right? I think they decided that.
Did they actually ban him from events, or all I know is about the disqualification?
But I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I think that the FACEIT admins were disqualified the team.
I see that's the thing. For all we know, they're talking with Valve behind the scenes, right? Like that's right. Honestly very possible with the TIA qualifiers. I wouldn't be surprised if Valve had some influence in that decision. So
yeah,
well, we don't know.
I also just wonder if there was a little bit of sort of payback for them unpausing and beating Pain during the group stages as well.
Yeah, that's something else.
Or during the open quals.
Yeah. There was that
sort
going
of like,
on.
All right, you did something shady once. Now you're doing it again. Now you're actually out.
Yeah, that's right. Looking back at that now, geez. Oh, anyways, Pain Gaming. Again, it sucks that we're sitting here talking about the drama parts, but it's what people want to hear. I'm sure, and it's for good reason. But Pain Gaming ultimately qualifying, very deserving. It was probably one of the more entertaining grand finals. It really was. It went the distance, went 3-2. A side note as well on SG, Stan King, man, I feel bad for this kid. He literally was one game away from qualifying last season with Freedom from the North American region, which they came up short, and what would have been a miracle run itself, and then one game short here from South America. That's got to sting, man, for such a big life-changing opportunity to come up short twice, 2 years in a row by one game. I feel for him. That sucks.
Yeah, man, that definitely does suck as a competitor. And I got to say, I thought that SG was going to win. Like, it looked to me like they were about to qualify for TI, and then Pain, they kind of threw a little bit, and Pain made some great plays. And it was, like you said, it was definitely one of the most entertaining grand finals for the only spot out of the region.
Yeah. And, especially that like CIS, that's why I figured there could have potentially been the most entertaining, because there was only that one spot on the line. And both definitely had that. Europe, of course, another one, which we'll get into shortly. So Southeast Asia, though, we'll jump into that next. So Southeast Asia had 2 spots, of course, that were open for qualifying. And it's one of the regions that it kind of played out as expected.
Yep.
Not a whole lot of crazy stuff happened. Fnatic, ultimately the first place team that qualified. TNC Predator, the second place team. There was a little bit of the group stages where Fnatic lost to both of the TNC teams, and TNC Tigers with 1437 and crew maybe were able to make a splash, and I thought potentially could have actually qualified. But again, I think that's the best way to explain SEA, is that it was the expected.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the 2 teams that won were the ones that have been going to LANs this season, that have clearly proven themselves to be a tier above everybody else in the region, and they just continue to prove that in the qualifiers. So ultimately, we get the best C teams at TI, and I think that's good.
Yeah, it goes back to that point. For the sake of competition, exactly, it's probably for the best that the best teams did qualify. Entity made a little bit of a run. It was fun seeing that again. My boy Black was hoping that could have seen something out of that. Would not have been disappointed at all if they happened to qualify, but Fnatic and Predator were the better teams and the deserving in the end. So Is there really much else to say about Southeast Asia? I don't think so. That pretty much covers it. Well, the expected. Stats. I guess we should do that first.
Yeah, we can look at stats a little bit. I think it's kind of interesting that Ember Spirit had a 14% win rate. He only won 1 game out of 7 picks.
Wow.
And that's a hero that I feel like I was seeing picked in like every other game pretty much in a lot of the other regions. And I know that's a hero that a lot of mid players are valuing right now, but did not do very well in these qualifiers.
We've been seeing real quickly on that. We've been not only seeing mid, but we've been seeing some safe lane Ember too. I feel like a bit.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's the same here or not, but
I'm not sure. But with some of these things, just because the sample size is fairly small, it could just be certain teams are playing it and other teams are not, and teams that are playing it are not as good as the other ones. But it's kind of hard to say. Just looking at some of the numbers, it was one of the interesting things that stood out. Another interesting thing is that Mirana seems to be one of the strongest heroes in the region, and really across the board. Mirana, this was like a breakout event for Mirana. I feel like we started seeing a lot of Mirana in mid, in the off lane, and the hero just seems to be at a really kind of insane place right now, where even safe lane Mirana is being played too. And here, 71% win rate in 14 games is a pretty big deal. And the last hero that I wanted to highlight was Enigma.
Really?
Just because, Enigma, 5 games, 100% win rate.
Wow.
This is a hero that we haven't seen a lot in the pro scene, but the way that TNC was running it, they were running Enigma as a support, and they were basically using it as like a lich in the off lane to eat the creeps. But then I think it was Cuckoo who was playing it, was turning it basically into a core. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, Enigma was played a lot by Universe.
Yeah, no, that's what I saw. The Fnatic went 4-0 with it. It was just TNC the one game.
Yeah. So actually, we're seeing some offlane Enigma from Universe. And when you're going into TI, I'm just going to say this as a fan of the game. When you're going into TI, you want Enigma to be a hero that's in the hero pool.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a hero that's gotten a lot of buffs in many of the recent patches, and could be at a point where it is kind of an insane hero. And so hopefully we get some crazy black holes at TI8.
As a caster, I agree with you 100%, man. That's one of the more iconic abilities to cast, of course. Nothing like casting a black hole from Enigma. So I would be all for that. Very interesting there. That Fnatic, specifically going 4-0 with the hero. Yeah, a hero that, because he still has that GPM talent, I believe, at level 10, if I'm not mistaken. So even the idea of playing it in a position 4, which you were mentioning TNC Predator was kind of doing, I could definitely see it working. And you get the early hand of Midas on him, too. He could take off quite a bit.
He has to choose between GPM and cooldown at 15, actually.
It's at 15,
level 10 talent isn't very good, but just the fact that he has the ability to constantly pull the wave back, to take experience off the map, which is a really big deal, and then just has a game-changing ultimate that can really just, even as a position 4, all he really needs is to have, one good initiation, one good blink, or even just running in with a BKB, and you can completely change the course of the game.
Denies a laning phase. Game-changing ultimate. Where's my boy Lich? Why are we not seeing Lich as a top-tier hero on the scene? No,
game-changing ultimate.
Yeah, okay, yeah, maybe a little bit of an oversell there. It's not as it's fun to cast, call it a Plague-oo, get that call going, classic StarCraft stuff. All right, so that's Southeast Asia. There you go. Okay, so next we'll jump into Europe. Happening, one qualifier, one of a couple regions to have that once again. And OG, the team that qualified in, a couple of months ago, I wouldn't be as surprised saying it, I feel like. It would be like, okay, OG qualified. I was expected, right? Obviously, things changed. They had a roster change, the last-minute additions of Thompson and Ana. And although they're very good players, I expected a little bit of a little new players coming in, maybe going to need some practice time. Would they be the same team as before? They weren't the same team as before, I think you can argue, but they They dominated. This was their region to take, and they did. They never really found themselves in that difficult of a spot. I mean, I didn't watch every single match by any means, but they went 7-0 in the group stages, and sure, they dropped a couple of games in the playoffs to Win and Reign, both in the winter finals and the grand finals, but that's it. Win and Reign proved to be a very strong team, almost qualifying themselves, of course. But no, I go back to OG. They were the dominant team here.
Yeah, they looked significantly better than anybody else in the qualifier. So, I mean, once you saw them actually play against the other teams, it's not that surprising at the result. I was really surprised at how badly Alliance flamed out, not even making it to the playoffs. But once you got to the playoffs, you really kind of saw that this new lineup from OG seems to kind of fill the problems that the team has been having for the last year, which is that they have space takers, finally. They actually have people that will eat up the space and do something with it. When you had No Tail playing carry, it always felt like he was sacrificing himself, and they just never really had like a real strong dual core possibility, because it was always like 4 people sacrificing, or even when they would try to prioritize No Tail's hero, it just didn't really feel like there was enough like carrying going on the team. I'm not saying like No Tail is a bad carry, but I'm just saying that it didn't really feel like they ended up scaling well. They had to execute all their lineups perfectly to really win these games, and that's not what you want. You want your high-skilled carry and mid players to be able to take over the game once you make them enough space, and that's kind of what this feels like with Ana, who obviously historically has been one of the best space eaters in the game.
You won't say it. I will say it. I have a lot of history with No Tail, going back to the Hondas, of course. I consider him a friend of sorts. I've not been the most impressed with his carry play. I think he's not been the best carry. You look at the list of carry players amongst all these top teams, not only in Europe but just all throughout the world, and he would be down there on the not at the bottom of the list, but he would not be competing for a top spot. And obviously he's a great player in the end, a very diverse player. But it kind of goes to your point that picking up Ana and Thompson, what's another coincidence that these players have is that they're also much younger. And I think when it comes to a core role, in a lot of cases, having those young players that are willing to take those, those crazy play, go for the crazy play, go for the stretch sometimes, and play very well as a result, it can definitely help out your team as a whole. So I do feel like No Tail's much better off being back in the support role. And that to me is kind of the biggest change that happened here, and what I noticed at the few matches that I did catch watching of OG. And also, I got to say this, Thompson, I've gotten the chance to cast him a couple times on just random teams here and there throughout the season. I'm so happy that he's playing, because again, his Quaswex Invoker, as an Invoker player myself, is so fun to watch, and we did get to see it at least once, if not a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the regional qualifiers itself. So that's something that teams will have to respect when they match up against OG at TI8. And I also talk about a player that literally was just streaming, not expecting to compete for TI, I'm sure, and then 1 week, and then the next week he's playing for OG and going to TI8. That must be a feels good man moment, unlike one we were talking about before with South America there, but OG, man, yeah, they had a hell of a run here.
Yeah, they looked really good, and I would expect that a team that has, the likes of No Tail and Mad will be able to kind of really coordinate this group and come up with some good stuff for TI. Mm-hmm. Obviously, let's not forget about Jerix, who's, up there in the conversation as best roamer 4 position in the world.
Yeah, that I agree with too, for sure. Yeah, this is a very, very good team, and they proved that here in the European qualifiers. Now, there are some that will argue when it came to overall competition, was it really the strongest, maybe outside of South America? Win and Reign looked pretty good themselves, and this is a team that, they obviously had a fair amount of North American representation, Kitrak, Bryle, and Ritsu. Forev out of Korea there. Milan was technically the only European player competing for the team. If it wasn't for OG, then they could have been going to TI8 themselves, but, unfortunately they had to get through them, and that wasn't going to happen. Obviously, Misery Scott of Blink Pool also got fairly deep, but not good enough. The big disappointment for me, Frank, was TFT, man. The final try. This team just completely fell off after the Super Major and everything, and they had a decent run later on in the season, and I thought that alone was going to be this momentum, a reason why we should expect them to be competing, if not going to TI8, but they completely flopped here with that 1-5 record in groups, and was just disappointing to see. And again, a history that I have on a personal level too with these guys. It sucked, but that's how it falls sometimes for these teams.
Yeah, losing to Kingdra and Kingwin for them, I'm sure, was a pretty like morale breaking moment. I would say.
Yeah. All right, so that's Europe. That's it, right? No other regions? We're good?
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's go to the final one here. North America. All right, so on a personal level, as I've mentioned several times, it happened to be the one that I was casting at the hub itself. So obviously I was really looking forward to it, and being North American, having many reasons why I was excited for it. Now, the one downside for me was it was 3 teams qualifying. So possibly that would take away from the hype, and it would be kind of meh in the end. No, that was not the case. North America, even despite having 3 teams qualify, first, I love the format that they did. The idea that the top team out of groups qualified for TI itself, and then they had the 2 from the playoffs qualify after the fact. But not only, so as the first place team, we ended up having a 3-way tie for first with VGJ Storm, Optic, and Complexity. They played a 3-way tiebreaker best of 1. Ultimately, Storm won it. That qualified for them for TIA. But, of course, another big storyline was Evil Geniuses having a little bit of struggle in the group stages. They did manage to move on to the playoffs, and then, as we know, qualify in the end in that third and final, or actually in the second spot, excuse me, even. But there was a lot of people there who were like, well, EG, they're not going to TI8. So we'll start at the VGJ Storm. They're the first team to qualify. What do you think about the tiebreakers and everything, and then moving on?
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like this region was defined by because of how crazy it got with all of the tiebreakers, and teams losing to teams that you weren't expecting them to lose to, and then all of a sudden we had, I personally was pretty surprised at Complexity going 6-1 group stage. I wasn't completely sleeping on them, but I didn't think that they were going to, significantly outperform EG, and they did. So once we got to the actual playoffs, I don't know. I think that VGJ Storm looked like the best team at this qualifier. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they're necessarily better than Optic, but at this qualifier, they looked like the best team.
I agree.
And so with them qualifying in the tiebreaker and not having to go through the playoffs, I think that played out as it should have. I think that Resolution seems to be kind of fitting into that team a lot better than he was, even a month ago. And so it was nice to see them kind of coming back together, because they were the team that they were like, oh my God, VGJ Storm, they're the next thing. They're the best team in NA for sure. And then they kind of didn't perform that well at Super Major, right? Mm-hmm. And we were like, oh, well, what actually happened to VGJ Storm? And now showing up at the qualifiers, they certainly looked much better than that.
Well, one of the biggest things that they did was use that Drow strategy that I was talking about. They right off the bat against Optic Gaming, casting that match, they busted out Drow, and that seemed to completely catch Optic Gaming off guard when it came to that strategy. They ended up running it at least one more time. Another victory, they started to get it banned against them, which opened up other heroes. So they had that great start, and yeah, as you mentioned, though, I mean, it was crazy, even as a Complexity fan, to see Complexity beat them, though, on the opening of day 2, which then caused all this chaos in the first place. Complexity getting so close several times as a result, but obviously coming out short with the tiebreakers there. Well, the team that we haven't mentioned yet, that we definitely at least have to, is Immortals. This is a team that, where the hell did they come from? They were in hibernation, however you want to call it, where they were completely off the map. They happen to be one of the 2 invited teams with Optic Gaming, of course, for the NA region, as their roster was still the same. But they really weren't competing in any events at all outside of some qualifiers for the lands that they didn't end up qualifying for, of course. but they almost qualified for TI8. They were on the verge. They defeated Optic Gaming 2-1, and they were going up.
Did they know?
Well, yes. I mean, kinda. They were literally a series away twice. I think that's close to qualifying for TI8.
Yeah, it's pretty. I guess so. I mean, it's pretty close to qualifying in the broad scheme of things, but they definitely did not look like they belonged in either of those winners or losers finals against those teams.
100% agree with you there, and I would have probably been devastated if they did qualify, because I think it would have taken away a little bit from some storylines. I am happy that we got the teams that we did. As a Complexity fan, that is hard to say, but they were not the top 3 team. It was Optic, it was VGJ Storm, and it was Evil Geniuses in the end. Complexity had their shots, and they looked decent at points, but they came up short too. But, man, it really did end up being a hell of an NA event when it came to these qualifiers, and what was a lot of fun to watch. And all 3 of those teams, maybe NA bias, who knows, and again, we'll preview more down the line, but they could have deep runs, right? This isn't a case of like, oh, well, Evil Geniuses, they're going to not have a good – I mean, they could. This is Evil Geniuses we're talking about. All 3 of these teams could definitely go deep in this event of TI8. So I'm excited that those are the 3 that qualified in the end.
Yeah. I think this is the first year that we might have, like, I guess actually DC and EG both made it to the top 4.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we could legitimately have 3 NA teams in the top 8. It's possible.
I know there's people in chat right now sitting there saying you guys are idiots, and that's fine. But
NA bias
on a level-headed, argument, I think that is possible. Will it happen? Very likely not because of the odds, but it's possible, and teams are very worthy of getting to that point. So,
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Evil Geniuses may end up being the best NA team at TI at this point. Like, they looked pretty darn good, and I think with a month plus to prepare, Fly is going to be able to really, I mean, with the leadership from Fly and S4, like, I can't imagine this team not doing well.
I don't know. See, when you look back at how Evil Geniuses qualified, I think that is very important. The only team they had to beat Immortals, and as we both agree on, Immortals did not belong out of those top 4 teams really as far as competing. They had to beat Immortals and Complexity to get to TI. They didn't have to beat Optic. They didn't have to beat Storm. They lost to both of those teams, in fact, in the group stages, and from what I remember, pretty handily. I mean, those are pretty one-sided games for the most part. So, yes, we have a lot of time, and Fly is a great captain that will no doubt make sure his team is prepared, and the skill level is very high on this team. But I still continue to be a person who's sitting here thinking that OG is still overhyped for the most part because of the brand and everything. So to your point, I do disagree, but again, we have some time, and we'll maybe kind of reevaluate that as we get closer to TI8 in the main event itself. But they qualified. That's what matters. Them, Optic, and VGJ Storm, of course, once again.
Yeah, I mean, once again, the qualifiers did a pretty good job of giving us the teams that really deserve to be there. I think that's a good thing to have happen in the qualifiers. Obviously, you want the best teams to be at TI, and in the past, we've had more direct invites, and people have questioned those and debated them. But with all of these qualifier spots and only 8 teams being directly invited, I really think that this might be the strongest field top to bottom we've ever had at a TI, and that's definitely a good thing for the scene.
I think that's just natural evolution. I don't care what anyone says. I mean, players are just better nowadays than they were a couple years ago, even more than that. I mean, that's just going to be the case moving forward. I don't think there's an argument there personally. So absolutely agree there. This is definitely the best competition we're going to see as far as up and down with all the teams competing. All right, so that's the qualifiers. Hopefully that, in case you missed any of the regions or somehow the whole event itself, I don't know how that would be the case, but if you did, hopefully you enjoyed that. So moving on to the Summer Cup that's going on right now. They obviously with the qualifiers ending, all of a sudden we're in this lull phase of what the hell do we do with ourselves? Not a lot of Dota going on. Well, BTS coming through yet again. They decided to host this Summer Cup, as they called it. It's essentially a CIS European region qualifier for their Summit 9 event. That's going to be happening in the near future here. Now, I don't believe there's a lot of information out just yet for Summit 9. And in fact, a date hasn't even been announced yet. I think they're aiming for later July, so near the end of this month. Well, I'm sure they're still trying to confirm with the teams is the biggest thing as far as who they're going to have invited and everything. But they decided to run a qualifier in the meantime, so we're getting some Dota out of it. There's a lot of these teams that we were just talking about in the regional qualifiers competing, and kind of scrolling through. We are, as of today, we're in the group stages of what's their second phase here. Wind and Rain and Let's Do It, also formerly known as Kingwin, by the way. They ended up dropping Kingwin. Now they're known as Let's Do It. They are both advancing on.
Kingwin dropped them, I believe.
Oh, was it the other way? Okay. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Each of the groups will still move on into then a double elimination playoff, as you can see, and then the ultimate one team. It's one team, right? Yeah, one team will qualify for the Summit event. So, I don't know. It's just fun that we have some filler Dota in the meantime, is I think the ultimate take from this.
Yeah, and for a region that, you know, some people thought might have gotten kind of shafted with their only one TI invite.
True.
And so it's nice that we get to see some more from this region, which has been very chaotic for most of the season, both Europe and CIS. And it is, I mean, Wind and Rain continuing to look good. It's interesting that they stayed in Europe and are continuing to play there. Also, one other fairly exciting thing, I think, for Dota fans is that Dendy is playing on Vega Squadron now, not on Navi at all. And
yeah,
you know, obviously they didn't.
That feels weird.
It is. It's definitely weird. It's definitely different.
I mean, I don't know how much, because nothing's been officially announced yet. So Navi is. I think even the CEO mentioned how they're figuring it out. Essentially, there's nothing official. He hasn't left the team. As you point, he's a stand-in for Vega Squadron for this event. So don't look too much into it yet. But personally, I wouldn't be surprised if he just leaves the team as an actual competitor. He goes to just being a streamer, whatever representation of Navi, and makes a ton of money that way. Because he is getting older. Not that he's crazy old by any means, but I could see that being a possibility. When it comes to Dendy moving forward, but who knows?
Did you read his long tweet blog?
The CEO or Dendy?
Dendy.
I did not read that one. No.
He wrote this really long thing about, you know, all the hate that he's been getting and how much he just loves competing, and he's going to be a player for a long time, and he doesn't think that age is anything to do with performance in Dota. And it was a really good read. You should definitely go check it out. I'll link it to you afterwards. But it sounded like he has no intention of stepping down from competitive Dota because he just loves competing in this game. And whatever team he ends up on, maybe Navi, maybe somewhere else, he's just going to continue to try and bring his experience and do his best and continue to play mid and all of this stuff.
The passion's there, I get that, but then there's the business side, right? There's we don't know, first off, what his contract's like. Is another organization really going to put up what he's worth? Because, again, his reputation is worth a lot. He's one of the most, in the Western scene, I think you could argue he's the most popular Dota 2 player that we've ever had. And he definitely has a crazy following. So the idea, is there going to be an organization out there that buys out his contract so that he can play for their team competitively when... Is he really one of these top-tier competitive mid players anymore? I don't know if you can necessarily put him in that argument right now. It might not be fair because Navi as a team has just kind of been really rocky. But so I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense. But because I guess at the same time they would also then get that brand. And, yes, that would be good for their brand, whoever does pick him up. But from a pure competitive aspect, paying how much they would have to pay to buy out his contract, whatever it may be, that's where I'm a little hesitant to believe that he is going to end up somewhere else in the end. So,
yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, in the blog, it said multiple times that he does not play Dota for money. He doesn't care about money. He actually doesn't make all that much in salary, and he's never really asked for more, even though he knows that he could potentially be worth more because of his brand, just because he is really in it just to play Dota. And obviously, you know, that sounds very, very idealistic. I don't know Denver personally, he seems like he might be that type of person. But ultimately, you know, we're not going to know until the man himself makes the decision. But you know, from his blog, it really sounded like he just wants to keep playing.
Yeah, no, again, I believe it. He does seem like a guy that just genuinely wants to play. The business side, I just wonder, it could be the ultimate holding thing back for now at least, but I might be wrong. You know, maybe he will end up somewhere else and play another team. But going back to the beginning of that, again, he still technically is a part of Na'Vi, still trying to figure that out, but currently standing in for Vega Squadron in this event, who is still in it, but they are in 0-1 in Group A. Gonna have to fight back to try to make it to the playoffs. But yeah, Win or Rain is definitely my team to win this, and you know, being in this NA squad coming into Europe and coming close to qualify for TI8 now happens to be, you know, like you said, you're surprised they almost stayed at. I'm not, frankly, you know, getting to qualify to go back to now Summit 9, and
Yeah.
who cares if you place well there? That's a crazy fun event to play at, anyway. So
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I guess they have you know, 2 North American or 2 U.S. players, 1 Canadian, and then Korean and a Bosnian, I believe. Yeah. So, you know, I guess they're just another one of these sort of like worldly teams.
Yeah.
Picked Europe as their spot.
We'll call them that, worldly teams. All right. What else did we? Oh, that's right. How can I forget this? One of the last things I guess we can talk about here before we start to wrap things up in full. Want to spend the time this deserves, though, to talk about this epic event that we've already seen parts of at the TI8 qualifiers, shown off by BTS. Bot TI officially announced as far as the full schedule, the talent that's going to be there, the prize pool, everything. Bot TI, which by the way is $0. Now this so. On a serious note, this is kind of it's a clever idea that they're running with. Obviously, if you're tuning into the PA coverage of BTS, you probably saw glimpses of it. They're literally having 5 versus 5 of a specific hero play against one another in what they're calling Bot TI, and they have this AI that was created to do so on its own custom map, I believe, even, where they just go at it, and whichever wins, that they have 5 or 3 different levels. So it's a best of 3. It starts at level 5, goes to level 15, then level 25, I think it is. So, you know, you progress with more items, more of the popular items, as well as the abilities that they pick up throughout the levels, and they just let the AI do its thing. So it's kind of one of those. It sounds so stupid, but at the same time, it's fun. It's a lot of fun to watch, and they're going all out with this, man. I mean, they're making this a big deal. So I love this, and it starts in 2 days.
It's the easy bots, right? It's just the easy bot AI from Dota, I think.
Oh, I don't even know. I honestly don't even know if that's the case, but
I'm pretty sure it's just easy bots. And so you see some pretty silly things like
okay, it is, yeah.
Everybody stunning the same hero, everybody orchiding the same hero, even stack at all. You see, yeah, there's definitely some really interesting interactions. It's kind of like an exploration of the code of the game and what the bots are prioritizing as important. We've seen a lot of blade mail heroes be very strong because the bots don't seem to have a whole lot of self-awareness when it comes to, you know, dealing damage to themselves. And like you said, it's been really entertaining. I definitely tuned in every time that it was on, and I laughed for the entire segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it starts in 2 days, and I'm genuinely looking forward to it, because when we were teasing it at the TI8 regionals, we would do like 2 or 3 of them at a time, and then you wouldn't do any until the next day even. And it's just like, come on, man, we need to watch more of this and see what happens. But this is just going to be, you know, back. It starts at 11 a.m. Pacific on July 7th, and they play half of the first round matches, and then the next day they'll play the other half, and they go to round of 64 all the way to the main event days, where it then breaks down into another bracket, I guess, like double elimination. So they're really going all out with this, and it's so genius, because it doesn't really there's effort involved, sure, but it's not like a crazy amount of effort. Yet there's gonna be 50,000 viewers plus easily watching. I would put the number on 60,000 and possibly go over that. Like,
60,000 for
Yeah.
bot TI.
Oh, when it gets to the finals, yeah, they're gonna hype this up, man.
That would be quite quite the event if that actually happened.
It's going to happen, and it's so genius. I love it, though. Who's going to be in the finals? That's the ultimate question, right? Like, so we're going to sit here and analyze, like, which easy bot's going to win it all. That's so hard to say because who knows what matchups they're going to get along the way. But if you had
to
to
do the predictions on their fantasy site,
I did initially. I did, like, the first, like, 20, and you weren't able to do any past that, I don't believe, so...
yeah, you could pick like the final 16, I think, or something like that.
Oh, can you now? Okay, then I haven't gone further than that, so I guess I should then do further than that. But I don't know, like if you had to pick maybe one or two heroes that come to mind as far as that could, go the way. Is there any that come to mind? That's tough.
I mean, Spectre's got to be up there, right? It's a hero that returns damage. Level 25 is arguably the strongest hero in the game. And yeah, that would probably be my pick to win it all.
What about Axe? Could that work? I guess he'd get owned by like range stuns. Yeah.
I think that OD might beat him in the next when they match up.
Oh, is he matched up against OD? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I like your idea of the blade mail though, because that does make a lot of sense. And so Spectre would be a pretty obvious choice there then, yeah.
I love it that we actually had, like the panels, everybody's trying to do their analysis, and you had Purge and BSJ and Grant and Trim and all these guys, like actually trying to reason out what was happening.
Like they actually officially announced, like they're having an actual talent list here. Like I said, they're now right. It's majority BTS people, to be fair, but still, they're having fun with this, and I like it. All right, so it starts tomorrow, or 2 days from now, July 7th. That would be what, Saturday? Yeah, starts Saturday. Looking forward to that. All right, I think we're good. Is there anything else you can think of we missed here? Oh, well, did we? I know we talked about it kind of before. Let's just give our initial, I guess, opinions on it, and maybe it's something we can go more in depth later on. If you've been paying attention to Reddit, now this isn't the first time this has happened. It happens every now and then, so that's why I think it's kind of worth at least just talking about. What I'm getting at is Eternal Envy was seen destroying his items basically in a game, and raging at his teammates and basically giving up on his teammates, and it started this whole discussion of yet again players should be getting banned for doing this, and just because you're a top-tier player that has this huge fan base and everything doesn't mean you should be given special advantages. It really is. It's a tough thing to kind of just sit back and like give a direct answer to on what I guess we think on it. But I am a believer that if you are banned on the game on your account itself, then you should be banned from competing in the game as well. I think there should be a standard there that is held. However, I do also think there should be at least a little bit of leeway given to said top-tier competitors when it comes to making the decisions to banning said accounts because of what they are competing for. Not to say that they should have, rights to do what they're doing and destroying items and ruining games for everyone and everything, but this isn't a black and white issue, I think is the biggest point. This isn't like just because Randy and wherever gets banned for doing it over and over again that Eternal Envy should be getting banned because he did it on stream to thousands of people and was made a big deal blowing up on Reddit. So that's my take on this. But
I mean, I don't think that there should be preferential treatment, but I also don't think that Eternal Envy will ever be banned in the game because he's aware of how the behavior score system works. And you get one free abandon per week. First of all, you just lose MMR in the game, and you don't get low priority or anything like that. And if he notices that he's getting a bunch of reports because he destroyed his items, he'll just stop destroying his items, and then his behavior score will go back to being where it normally is. And I mean, I would say that the chances of him ever being banned from matchmaking are 0, just because the game tells you you have low priority games. You are at risk of being banned, and you can just stop having bad behavior and then you won't be banned. So he's not going to get banned. That being said, like, just stop destroying your items. Everybody, stop feeding on purpose. Like, I don't know, handle your emotions, man. Like, do some yoga, meditate, go for a walk.
I'm with you. I never understand the idea of destroying items, and so it's baffling to me. It is. But
it's like, oh, well, the game was over and he's a pro player, so he knows that. So that's totally acceptable because it lets him to go on to the next game and practice sooner than he would otherwise. Like, dude, it's just, it ruins the experience, and it just proliferates that behavior to other people that think it's acceptable. And, like, there's people that look up to him. Like, that's, just have a little bit of a higher standard for yourself if you have a position of influence. That's all I really have to say on the subject.
Yeah, it's like when certain things are said by these high influence people, and that backfires as it should. Frankly, it's just when you are going out of your way, especially in his case, this wasn't like somebody found this in a replay. Like, he's literally streaming it himself, and you're doing something that, I mean, you do make a good point. He is doing something that the game allows him to do, at least to a limitation, and he won't get banned because he knows his limitation. So in that sense, he's not getting special advantage, by the way, because it's the same for every other player. It's just completely blowing up, obviously, because of the viewership, because of the Reddit post and the name and everything. But it's blown up because of who he is. So, yeah, it is a double-edged thing, and he should be, as any top-tier player, should know better and be keeping that in mind when it comes to their reputation and the organizations they represent too. That's the other thing for me. It's like, how does Fnatic feel about this? Is Fnatic okay with their big name player in Eternal Envy doing this publicly on stream? And I even saw a tweet from him that came out after all this. He's like, guys, I do this like every week. As you pointed out, he has the one time a week. He does this every week, and it's never been an issue before. It's just, why is it blowing up now? So I don't know. It's
like, I can go feed on purpose in 1 out of every 10 pubs, and I'll never get, but I'm not going to do that because it's stupid. It's a waste of time.
Best way to put it. All right, let's see if Eternal Envy wants to come on the podcast next week. I'll invite him on. Talk about it.
Sure,
he'll be down. I've actually had him on before. I mean, he seems like he is willing to talk about things like that. So
yeah,
that would be fun to be able to grab him, but something tells me no. Anyways, I think we covered it then. We got that out of the way as well. I think we're good. I think we finished another week here. Dota Procast. Despite our best efforts on Tuesday, things got delayed, but we made it happen here on Thursday, so hopefully you guys enjoyed and were entertained and got some good information, if anything. That's what we're here for with the Dota Procast. The whole point of it is ideally a weekly podcast where we go over the competitive Dota 2 scene and both keep you up to date as far as what's happening, give our personal opinions, give our personal takes, and possibly even have some guests on the show, as we've had a couple of times throughout the podcast as well. So, but this episode number 5, we are wrapping up. Elevated, anything else?
No. Good luck. Have fun out there in your pubs.
I like it. Good luck. Have fun, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night. We will see you next time here on the Dota Procast. I'm BreakyCPK, joined by Elevated. See you next week, guys. Have a good night.